Hey, it's Book Reports, and in this video, I want to talk about 3 reasons why you need to read Artemis by Andy Weir. So the first reason is that this book is about space travel, and it's about living on the moon, or living somewhere other than Earth. And this whole story takes place on the city of Artemis, which is on the moon. And the reason why this is so significant now is because I think that space travel and living on Mars, living on the moon, is becoming highly relevant. I mean, just the other week we had the launch of the SpaceX rocket, and if you missed it, that was incredible. The fact that we can now not only do space travel through private companies, but also the fact that they are, through being a private company, they are finding innovative and cost-saving ways to do this so that one day maybe space travel won't be so expensive. You know, it was like back when airplanes, commercial flying was extremely expensive, where it was unsafe and it was really just for rich people. But eventually, over time, it became more streamlined. There became more companies that could do it. It wasn't just TWA. It became this thing where you got United, Continental, and all these different companies, and they were able to provide this service because it was so much cheaper. And so I think one day maybe space travel can be like that. And I feel like, at least here in the United States, space travel has sort of been kind of ignored for a while. Back when it was the US versus the Russians, and it was this race to the moon, it was the race to space, it became this thing where it was highly emphasized. A lot of sciences, a lot of math were emphasized in schools, and so we could have engineers, we could have scientists, and eventually we were able to send people to the moon. But for some reason, we don't have that anymore. For some reason, that has sort of gone away, and I'm hoping to see that through SpaceX, through other enterprises, that we're bringing that back because it's so interesting. I really wouldn't be surprised if in my lifetime we somehow have it so that people can fly commercially into outer space and to the moon. We may not be able to live there because of just resources, and I mean, you're gonna have to bring water and be able to produce enough food on that colony, on that city on the moon. But I feel like we would be able to at least travel there, and it would be somewhat affordable. It might not be affordable for everyone, but it would be a lot more affordable than $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. I think you can get a ticket for maybe half that amount and be able to reasonably make it out to at least space where there's zero gravity. The second reason why I think you need to read Artemis is because of economics. And I talked about this twice in my previous videos about Artemis, that basically talked about cryptocurrency, about sort of like a Bitcoin that they have on Artemis and how that sort of works, but also how the end of the book sort of explains this idea, this theory on economics, and sort of the cyclical pattern that it has, the seasons within economics, and how you don't normally talk about that in sort of science fiction. It's usually not an important part, but in this story, economics drives a lot of what's going on, not just with Jazz as the main character, but also it drives the story in the background. It's the whole reason why Tron is doing what he does. It's the whole reason why the Brazilian mob is doing what they're doing, and it's because of the Zaffo cable. It's such an important economic sort of emerging enterprise that even the city administrator is trying to find ways to capitalize on this idea. And so really, it's a story about economics. And again, I made previous videos about this, so I won't go into detail about that. But if you've ever thought about economics, or maybe you've never thought about economics, but it really brought an interesting twist, in my opinion, on just this idea on how economics can really drive a story. And it's not a character in and of itself. It has no personality, but it's this mechanism, it's this sort of institution, it's this idea working on in the background of this entire story. And it's really controlling a lot about what the characters are doing. And in a way, I would argue that economics controls a lot about what we do in our daily lives. And it may not be a thing where we consciously think about all the time, but really economics is something that we do have to factor in. From our spending habits to what we consume online or in person. I mean, really, economics is working on in the background, even when we don't realize it. And so I feel like this story really, to me, opened up this idea of economics as a character. And the last and most important reason why I think you need to read Artemis is because it empowers women. And we see this through three characters in this story. And there's all different types of characters, very diverse in the story, but we're really seeing three great examples of women, young women, older women, who are very diverse in their background, ethnically diverse, but they are all very successful, very intelligent women in their positions. So we start off with Jazz. She is the main character. I mentioned in my Who is Jazz video kind of about her and some things I was learning as I was getting to know her as a character. But really, when you talk about Jazz, you have someone who is young, she is Saudi, and she is extremely intelligent. And she chooses to do a profession that isn't necessarily respected. You know, she's a porter, she is a smuggler in essence. But really, she has the potential to do so much, and people want her to do, you know, to join their profession, to join their guild, whether it be welder, you know, electrician, plumber, whatever it is. And I think that that shows that, and hopefully for young women, for anyone really, but for young women of color, of different backgrounds, that they can do those things, that it's okay to be smart, it's okay to be, you know, successful, and all these different things that I think this emerging culture, this emerging society is sort of breaking through and empowering women. We see that in these three characters, especially Jazz though, that there really is a woman character who sort of embodies all these different things. You know, I think about other female characters in maybe young adult stories where, you know, you think about Divergent, you think about Hunger Games, you know, Twilight, all these different emerging stories that have sort of come up in recent years. To me, none of them have been someone that I would say, oh yeah, I would want, you know, if I had a daughter or a sister, I'd be like, yeah, I want them to be like that. Not really. I really wouldn't want them to be like those characters. But when it comes to Jazz, I would say, yeah, that would be great. I mean, she is all these things that are very empowering, and yet she still keeps that femininity. You know, she's still a woman. You know, it doesn't make her, you know, any more masculine to be all these different things, but she can take care of herself. I mean, she fights a lot in this story. You know, she's a very physical person where, you know, she's not going to back down. She fights Alvarez and she fights Loretta Sanchez, which I found was very, very interesting, as the smelter was going to explode. They're fighting in the factory. But, you know, you think about all these things, and you put them into one character, and I think that that is a character that is worthy to be emulated, to be sort of looked upon as someone that could be their someone's hero, and particularly someone who is smart. You know, in these sort of, I think is just incredible. I think that that is something worth sharing, and something to that people can embrace, and that they should get to know this character, because it's something that they could look to, even though this person is fictional. They could look to someone and be like, you know, I like how this person is like that, and I really hope that that's not overlooked. The second person is Ngugi, who is the city administrator, and she's not Saudi, but I believe she's from Kenya, so I believe she's Kenyan. And here we have a woman who is a brilliant economist. She not only understands local economy, but she understands world economy. And she was the one in the story who did all of the administrative changes in Kenya to allow that country to be at the forefront of space. And that's something that economies today are trying to figure out what to do. How can they sort of set up a canvas, or how can they create an environment that'll encourage space and space technologies and that development, so that eventually we can launch into space. You know, it's not just the United States, it's not just Russia, you know, it's not just China. You know, there can be other places that, if they make the right accommodations, they make the right policies, and their administration is on full board, they can actually make this happen. And we see that through Ngugi. She, of course, then later explains, as I mentioned, she explains how the economy works, how she views the economy as this organic, changing thing that will sort of rise up out of control, settle down, and eventually it'll exhaust itself. But out of that will emerge other economies. And so we see this brilliant economist who is looking out for Artemis and the city and the future of the city, because she knows that they can't just rely on tourism for the rest of their lives. You know, she has the vision to see that. And so you want to talk about a female character who, or just any character, but really a female character who is from Kenya. She has incredible vision. She may not necessarily be the most educated person. I'm not exactly sure what her background was educationally, but just the vision and the leadership skills that she has to lead this colony, I feel like should be noted. And so maybe you're not an emerging young student, you know, who reads this book and maybe be like, oh yeah, that's something that I want to do. You can look at this character of Ngugi and be like, wow, like this is a powerful person. You know, she's the most powerful person in that city and frankly probably in the country of Kenya because of all the things that she's done and the vision that she has for the future. And the third person I want to bring up is Loretta Sanchez, who she's not really a character because for the most part she's just sort of referenced as the Sanchez aluminum factory. So I had no idea who Loretta Sanchez was. I know they ended up researching her to kind of find out more about the factory, that it was a front for the Brazilian mob. But we never really get to meet her until the end. And when eventually we meet her, she's kind of a tough person. But she is from Brazil, and she is a brilliant chemist. She kind of figured out the process to create oxygen from moon rocks, basically. And that's what made all of this sustainable, that she was able to pull out the aluminum to be able to create all of the Artemis domes, but also at the same time to create the oxygen for the people to live in those domes. And again, you have this scientist who is brilliant, who not only is smart, she's a very, very good chemist, but she is also an entrepreneur and a business owner. I mean, you have someone here who is doing all these things. And so I look back at all three of these women in this story. You have well, first of all, they're all intelligent, right? But you have someone who is sneaky, right? But she uses her feminine charm, but she's sneaky and she eventually changes, but she often is looking out for herself, right? She's just trying to survive. But her heart is always good. And that's one of the things that I like about Jazz as a character, is that as some of the choices that she may have made as a person, I may not necessarily agree with, but she always returns back to family, to friends, and the good of the city, and you have to respect that of her. And then you have Ngugi, who is just a brilliant economist who makes policy changes. She's very much a leader, and she demonstrates those leadership qualities. And then you have Loretta Sanchez, who is this brilliant scientist and business owner. And you look at all three of these characters and you think, wow, like that this is not something that is common, you know. And I hope that people take notice of this, because you talk about science fiction as a genre, probably not going to go there, right, as main characters. And especially to have these types of women who have culturally diverse backgrounds as the lead, to me that is just incredible. And so it's something worth noting. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I really encourage you to read Artemis. I enjoyed the book, and it's a book that, give it some time and you'll get it. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.